Welcome back to another apologetics video. This week, we're going to focus on a topic that really does not honestly hinge on the Bible a lot. This is just a real world analysis of life. And I'm talking about truth in this video, just to be clear. There are certain things that are true. There are certain things that are not true by definition. But how do we know what is and is not true? In a few of the videos recently on this channel, we've covered different things. First in the series was, what is a Christian? Is there evidence for Christianity? The salvation message, the philosophical arguments for God, and the summary of the Gospel of John. Now, we talked about truth in a bunch of these different videos, but I just want to specifically focus on truth today. Not merit, not minimal facts, not logical arguments, just truth. I'm a firm believer that if we recognize that there is truth, we can eventually get to the fact that there must be a God. But again, truth is the baseline for all of this, because if I believe something, but I can't prove it, well, that's just a belief. And some beliefs you can't necessarily scientifically prove. But truth should be able to be proven. At least the fundamentals of what truth is. See, if I say 2 plus 2 is 4, it's a mathematical truth. And we would all reasonably agree with that. If someone does not agree that 2 plus 2 is 4, well, it's a different issue, but maybe suggest to them that Pennsylvania is south of New York, the state. That would be true. It's a geographical truth. Maybe as historical truth, we could suggest that George Washington was the first American president. We could suggest that the Egyptian Empire occurred before the Roman Empire. This is a basic historical truth. So if there are mathematical truths, and if there are historical truths, if there are geographic truths, if I know that if I know that 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom could make water, and that is all that could reasonably make, then we also have a scientific truth. Is it possible, then, that there is this thing of spiritual truth? And I'm not going to say that in this video, you can't reasonably prove that there is Jesus as the only God just from asking that question of, is there spiritual truth? Though Jesus claims to be the way, the truth, and the light. And that's John 14:6. He says no one comes to the Father except through him. But what's important here is to recognize there has to be an element of truth. See, if I look at this cabinet behind me and say, it's green, which is the color it actually is, or some shade of green. But if someone else says that's a yellow cabinet, we have a difference of opinion. And one of us can be right or wrong. And I can get a photometer out here, it detects the wavelength of the light that reflects off of it, and I can say, no, that's a green wavelength. And if they still choose to say, no, it's yellow, they're what's known as wrong. And this is where it gets a little more challenging for us. We see in Titus, it comes at the end of the New Testament, that you're supposed to tell someone 1 time, 2 times. If they don't listen to you after the second time, don't waste your time on them, is what Paul says. And that's interesting, because that's the Bible saying some people just don't want to hear truth. Some people don't want to hear that their lifestyle that they really like just is not truthful. Some people don't want to sit with the fact that they've actually caused a lot of hurt by denying truth. A book I finished recently, did a review on, was Street Smarts by Greg Koukl. And in there, he conquers the abortion debate by strictly asking questions and just getting true or false responses. And that's how I look at truth. If we can say that certain things are objectively true, then they have to be true across all circumstances. The things I stated were objective truths. 2 plus 2 is 4. 2 hydrogen atoms plus 1 oxygen atom is water. It's not ethanol. It's not benzene. It's water. This is truth. There also must be absolute truth. Because if there's not absolute truth, then how do we know that anything itself is actually true? Let's go back to the cabinet as an example. If I sit here and say, that cabinet's green, and you say it's yellow, well, that's still a disagreement about the color of the cabinet. And if I sit here and say, why do you think it's yellow? And you say, well, light can change depending on the speed of which you're approaching it. This is a really scientific explanation. I'm sorry for that. But that is a mathematically, according to physics, true explanation. However, that is not the case for a stationary person looking at a stationary item. Again, we can normalize enough variables so that the thing that we're seeing has to be true. Now, you can go one step further, and this is where some people in the metaphysics world like to live, and they live in a world there's no absolute truth, because how can you actually trust the things that you're experiencing? I want to sit with that for a second, guys. People in this world don't trust the things that they experience, and not because they're at a magic show, though that would be a reason to potentially doubt yourself, but because they don't believe that anything could be objectively true. And if there's no objective truth, and that's what they're saying, that's what they're positing, I would ask, how are they absolutely sure that there is no objective truth? Because if you're absolutely sure that there's no objective truth, that in itself is an absolute truth, which negates the fact that there is no absolute truth. So there has to be absolute truth for us to reasonably exist. I'm going back to the word reasonably because it's the same way that a detective would approach a problem. So there's this book called Cold Case Christianity. It was worthy of a review on this channel as well. But one thing that it talks about is when detectives try to solve a murder mystery, they look for evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. They don't look to necessarily prove something absolutely, though that is preferred, but they look and say beyond a reasonable doubt. And beyond a reasonable doubt means that if something is true, and we don't have to take major leaps to get to it. Like, for instance, if I just said Jesus is God, believe me on that sentence, that's a big leap. And you would reasonably so have some confusion. But if I gave you evidence for why truth must exist, because things are the way they are, and they have to be a certain way so that we can objectively analyze reality, that would be an argument for truth. Another way to look at truth would be to say, I'm confident that the things I'm seeing are the same things that you're seeing, and because of that, we have a baseline. And we know that if we adjust things, we can now start to run a test of some sort, whether it's with temperature, or it's with airspeed, or whatever. This is an explanation for why there must be a truth that you're trying to discover. See, all of science is really just based on truth. If things are consistent, they're repeatable, we can control variables, then it's reasonable to say that if you only change one variable, the change in the output is responsible because of that variable being changed, because you've held everything else true or constant. Interesting is that another use of the word true is if you ever do construction, you would say this board is true, or an arrow might fly true. And that means it's flying straight. It doesn't curve. There's no bow inside of it, however your board wants to bow. It is a straight board. It is a straight arrow. And that is what truth is. Truth does not mislead you if you actually follow truth. And truth is logically sound. We can say, using a mathematical example, a number is greater than 4. A number is non-negative. Could that number be 6? Well, of course, because a non-negative number and a number greater than 4 would have to just be greater than 4. If I said a number is less than 4 and a number is non-negative, now we're talking 1, 2, or 3. This is a simple way of assigning truth based on a mathematical reality. This hinges on, again, things are absolutely objectively truth. We can prove things, and we believe our senses. If you don't believe your senses, then you don't actually have things that you can trust. If you can't trust yourself, then there's no way you can trust someone else. I encourage you, as you look about this world and you hear some interesting statements about truth or about how people's philosophies are dictated around seemingly arbitrary truth, ask them how they came to that conclusion. Ask them why they believe that's true, and see where they come from. See where that perspective actually began and why they think that that's a reasonable approach to the world. I'll see you in 2 weeks for another video about apologetics. We're going to talk about, hopefully, scientism and how science does not answer everything that God made. All right, see you later. Bye.